Thank you. I'm not very good at IT. We'll see what happens. Ta-da. Well, thank you. Just a couple of thank yous to start off with, if I may, to Mike Warbrink from Azul Staffing for conversation. Joe Johnson from Trust Vets is sort of setting me up, I should say, to be here today. Great organisation. And Kelsey Beach, who got me set up today here, plugged me in. Thank you. So we're going to go through some stories, some anecdotes, some examples of things. I'm going to try and tie in stuff that's relevant around leadership and motivation and tell a few stories. If you get me started over a lunch, then we can go in all sorts of different directions. But I'm going to try, I heard from this morning, stay focused. So I'm going to try and stay focused. I'm very easily distracted. Every picture or everything I have has some relevancy to the talk today. So I need you to hold the image here of the British flags and the American flag on the mall with a mounted unit of the Blues and Royals, just as they're coming up to Buckingham Palace to do a changing of the guard. That's going to be my very first day of duty ever in a uniform involved the cavalry, and my very, very last day of duty involved the cavalry. So I'm going to tell two stories about the cavalry because they're very relevant to they bookend my career. And I just need you to remember this picture. So, the next thing I was going to show you, I think there might be a door that's come up there. I was going to have a little clip of the 93rd Highland Regiment, the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, playing the bagpipes as they're coming out of Edinburgh Castle. I thought it would stimulate you in some way, but the link isn't working. But even this, I need you to remember the name of that regiment, and you would have had a picture, because that will come up a little bit later as well. So, first things, how did I end up in America? Oh, is it you're not hearing it? Is that on? Is that better? So, how did I end up in America? This is a picture of the Taj Palace Hotel, 2008. Do you remember the terrorist attack? So I, at the time, was in Delhi in connection with planning a royal visit. So being the nearest on-site they have in relation to the British intelligence services, that famous oxymoron, I ended up down in Mumbai and was subsequently down in Mumbai to put the security operation there for the memorial service to all the victims of that attack. And at the time, my wife, who runs a business in Minnesota, who's also a director of a charity called Pathways to Children, was on a mission trip with that charity in Priest from Minnesota and was passing through that hotel. So she was there for charitable reasons, and I was there for more official reasons, and we met and didn't see her for 2 years, but we stayed in touch, and one thing leads to another. And I've always been a bit of a detail guy. But I never read the small print on the back of a Minnesota marriage certificate. There's a bit there that says, "Thou shalt move to Minnesota." I always thought that she would come and live with me in London. No difference, right? Just a picture of... There aren't many women in their mid to late 80s that you can show a picture of the back of their head and everybody can say, "Oh, I know that is." So, this is the Queen, who celebrated yesterday a big landmark, the longest ever reigning monarch of Great Britain. 63 years and 7 months, beating the record of Queen Victoria. So if you were to add up her service, Queen Victoria's service, and Queen Elizabeth I's service, perhaps if you throw in Margaret Thatcher as well, we've been ruled by women for over 200 of the last 300 years. They haven't done a bad job, have they? So anyway, God bless your Majesty and well done for thank you for your service. I mean, I don't think anyone's served for quite that long here. I don't know what the record is in the room. But 63 years is a good time. So she's given me an award here as a thank you for all sorts of things, and she whispers to me, and we're having this conversation, and she says, she's thanking me for my loyalty and service and commitment to Great Britain. And she says, and now what are you doing? So, moving to America. There was a video of that thing, and you can see it when I sort of flinch as she kicks me in the shin. So I said I was going to start, and we're going to go down a little bit here in a sense, and you'll see why in a second. It's a story I love to tell. It's actually how I came to join the police force. I'm not going to say it today, but it's just a real story of leadership. I ended up in the police through leadership, through a man that did something and put me on the right path because I was in a little bit of trouble. My father was military. He was Royal Navy, and he was EOD. He was bomb disposal. And after many years of defusing IRA bombs, etc., when he left, my father was an alcoholic and ended up dying at 48. Just couldn't be rescued. I don't know why. But at that time, I was angry and I was young, and it was actually another military man that put me in the right path, and actually, well, perhaps wasn't the right path, put me in the police. But anyway, so I'm at police college, and I'm actually not licensed at this stage. I'm not old enough to go and wear a uniform out on the street. But what they would do with the classes from Hendon is they would put you down at Buckingham Palace when the Queen was having big events. So what you're seeing in this photograph is a picture of a garden party at Buckingham Palace, which the Queen holds every summer, and lots of people come through. It's a great ticket if you can get one. So I was down there basically as a car parking attendant in Green Park, next to the palace. So you can imagine, my first ever day to wear a uniform in public, and I'm going to the palace. So my first and last days revolve around the palace, the medal, and on duty, and the cavalry, and you'll see why in a second. So I'm in Green Park, thinking this is just the best job in the world. What does a young cop think? He's got a job, he gets to blue flashing lights, driving fast through the streets, and at that age, nurses. That's probably the only thing that's on your mind at that age. So I'm standing there, and a bomb goes off. 200 yards from where I'm standing. Do you remember that picture of the cavalry unit, the Blues and Royals? So 1982, that same detachment, their peers, were on the way to the palace to do a changing of the guard, and there was a car bomb in a Morris Marina on the side of the road. You can see where the car was that blew up. And, you go back sometimes. We all do it. This is my first day on duty, and the bomb detonates, decimating that unit at that point. So I'm buffed, I've got bald shoes, uniform, etc. Next thing you go running up, and you can see this is, there's colleagues and stuff in this photograph. This is just after the bomb was taken off, and you can see one trooper stood up in the background, but everybody else is pretty much wiped out. The guy with his hands on the hips is the veterinary surgeon from the unit who's actually just been brought down in a Land Rover from the barracks because the horses aren't all killed. And what you're seeing there, he's just euthanized all the seriously injured horses, and the troopers have all been taken away that are injured. I just wanted to say something about that. For all our service, whatever we do, people think it's at the end of training, when you've got experience and when you're prepared, that something will happen to you. But it's not always that way. It can be on your very, very first day that something happens. And you never know when it's going to happen. This is an amazing event, and yet a tragedy happens. So you never know. And I think it's something that I've always held in my career. And I think we're here as a leadership conference to talk about you never know, always be prepared. The other thing that I want you just to hear is things like that happen. But I'm one of the most optimistic people that you'll meet. I've always seen the upside. I've always tried to do better. I've always wanted to be part of things and people and make people feel good. It's been very easy to things like this happen and you become cynical. I just don't find in any relationship or anything I've ever done, cynicism works. I actually feel sorry for this guy. He was stood there for, I think, about an hour. This is the vet guy. It's just having put down all the horses and all the rest of it. It was a bad day. So I just thought I'd show a little bit about soldiering. I've been involved in military because of my royal duties, involved a lot of military duties. And I run William and Harry's protection detail from the time their mother died up through school, early military careers, etc. So I had a lot of involvement in seeing them growing up and the men that they become. Both of them were in the military, as you know. But it's just just a couple of things I want to say about what I've seen about soldiering. One is that you go out there and you serve, and that's the first photograph. The second thing I saw an awful lot of was fun. There's a lot of fun with soldiers and in their stuff, and this guy has always had a lot of fun, which I think famously you know about, right? This was Las Vegas. It's one of the reasons I had to leave. But thirdly, there's nothing about soldiers that they don't remember history and their colleagues, and you can snap from fun to combat to remembrance very, very quickly. We all have all of these personalities, and this is a picture of him. Now, I just want a little bit of a leadership story about Harry, something that he taught me. There's many things that he taught me, because he's a wonderful young man. But living in the goldfish bowl that he has always done, there's always this sense of, Harry, you've got to live a good life. If you do anything wrong, you're going to get caught. Your grandmother will find out. It'll be in the newspapers, etc., etc. So often I'll be saying to Harry, he's going to go and do something, and he's got the devil in him. And I'd say, Harry, don't do that. And for whatever you say, just don't do that. And for Pete's sake, don't do that. You know. But he did all of it. And his thing, he would sit down. There was me, a grown man. There was him from 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 18, and even today. And he would turn around and say, it's all right. That's what my friends are doing. It may not be right. It may be right or wrong. That's what everyone else is doing, and I'm going to do it. And I'd say, well, okay, then you better tell your father and your grandmother and all the rest of it. And he says, I will. But this is the point I want to make. He took responsibility. It'd been very easy for him to turn around and say, oh, woe is me, and blame all these people because of the situation I'm in or things that have befallen me, and if it only wasn't for this, I could do what everyone else did. He never said that. He never blamed the press. He never blamed everybody else. Everything he did, he took responsibility for, and he said, I did that. Never tried to shirk it or blame anybody else. And I think that's something else. It's another characteristic, isn't it? You take responsibility. And I just think that's always been a good thing for me, and again, in leadership. He is a lot of fun, as is his brother. So this is you can probably see me in the back of the picture there with long hair and carrying a bit of weight. I hadn't had days off for quite a long time. One of the things I'm proud about on this picture, the whole world, as I'm told, if you wanted to read the red top newspapers, the cheap newspapers in the UK the next day, were looking at the back of one of these two ladies' dress. But all the pictures you ever see of me on that, I'm actually looking at the crowd. I'm very proud of that. After all them years, I still managed to keep my eyes on what was important. One of the things after the wedding that I was due to take over Catherine's protection detail. But I'd already met and was engaged to Margaret from Lake Elmo, Minnesota. And I have said to some people, how many men in this world would you be able to turn around to them and say, you had a choice to run Catherine's protection detail for the next 5 or 10 years, or come and live in Minnesota and marry Margaret? I've never wavered. I don't know why you're laughing. It was easy for me. So I just want to give one, there was lots of anecdotes I can give about the wedding. It was a year before the Olympics. The pressure was there. It was probably the biggest televised event there's going to be for many, many years. And actually, I was invited as a guest to the wedding. I was with William when he met Catherine in St Andrews University. And conversations around which I shudder to think there's probably other reasons I need to leave the country. When you're talking to a young man and you don't know what the future holds and you're just saying about what you think about this young lady, he's telling me what he thinks, I'm telling him what I think. And anyway, we won't go there. We used to have a scoring system, and one of them was 1. Anyway, some of you might know what that means. So there's pressure from the government, there's pressure from the actual wedding ceremony, etc. But there's one thing I want to say about flexibility. And it's something that I'm needing to learn from a kind of a pseudo-forces background, and perhaps all of you coming from the forces and running your own businesses. Sometimes flexibility is something we sometimes struggle with because it's my way or the highway a little bit, because I've always had to. That's been the deal. So I've done the security plan for the wedding. The Archbishop, he's the man in the hat. He's done the wedding thing. And now he's done a few weddings in his time, and I've done a few security operations in my time. So I think this is going to fit together real well. So I go down to Lambeth Palace, and I'm setting out the security plan to make sure that we're not going to be in the way or causing a problem. And there's one bit of the service I'm really interested in. Anyone know what he's going to say something, and I'm really interested in how he's going to deal with it. Anyone want to make a guess? He's going to ask the audience a question. Does that help? He's going to turn around, live on TV, 3 billion people, I'm told. Maybe that's a big, we Brits exaggerate. But there's a few people watching this on TV. And he's going to turn around to say, does anybody in the audience have any reason as to why these two shouldn't be married? Does anyone have any objections? Okay? And I'm thinking at this point, live audience, I'll tell you about the audience in a second, that some nugget is going to put their hand up. Because it's not only, there's only 2,000 people in the church, but about 500 of them are from the charities and the things that the Prince is sponsoring, his charities. Now, don't take this the wrong way. These are really, really good people. But I sometimes have one problem with really, really good people, is that they kind of have morals and ethics, and they always want to get their message over. So I just thought one of them would turn around and say, global peace or global warming or save the polar bears or maybe save the whales, which, by the way, was my job. Some of you will get that one. And so he said, I said, well, okay, so I said, what would you do? And he said, well, I'll say that. If someone has an objection, I'll invite them up to the front. We'll stop the wedding, by the way. And then I'll ask them their objections, and there'll be an adjudication, and we'll get on with the service. I said, just say it's a little bit more what you're actually going to do. You're going to have them walk all the way out through the aisle, past all the visiting heads of state, royal families, past the Queen, past the Duke of Edinburgh. Does anyone see the danger there? Harry's in full military dress with his ceremonial sword on his side. Do you think he would have got past Harry? So there was a lot of dangers there, but also I wasn't going to let it happen. So I said, there's not a chance if somebody protests or objects to the wedding that they're going to walk up the front and this is going to happen. And he said, well, it has to. Has to. And we get into this situation where he won't give and I won't give, and it got a little bit childish. I said, well, it ain't going to happen. Yes, it must. So we stopped the meeting, and then it was put off about a week, whereby there was another meeting then planned at Buckingham Palace. Actually, as a police officer, I walked into a bit of a trap. I just went to go and explain my rationale. I walked into this room, and there's about 30 people. There's lawyers, there's people in wigs, there's all sorts, and they've got books piled up like this with bits of paper out of these books, which are going to be references as to why. And what I realised was going on, the Archbishop and the church side were very much about supporting their reasons as to why it always has to be done this way, rather than looking for flexibility. You know, when someone digs their heels in, everything's about the reasons why. So at that point, we get a message from the Queen. And I think, oh my goodness, well, the Queen now knows about this, it's going to be a big deal. And the message is simply this. On April 29th, William and Catherine will be married. And she just leaves, takes corgis for a walk in the garden. And think of it from leadership terms. How often, if you're a leader, you just want to give direction? You just want to say to people what to do. As soon as you start getting involved in the how to do it, you take away the energy, the creativity, the solution, the ownership, which is just wonderful things. So all the Queen was interested in was giving a message, which is they shall be married. And actually, do you know what? All the books started to close. We all looked at each other, knowing now the Queen's involved. We didn't want to get in trouble. And we actually started to talk to each other, and we found a solution. I'm going to go into the intricacies of the solution. It's a bit dull. But we got a solution. Flexibility was opened up by somebody having leadership and saying, make it so. Long way around. I want to tell a little bit of a story. This is a kind of a military story, but it involves an American and involves a little bit of spirit about how you do your business, etc. So this is Belize, a few years ago now. And I'm actually taking time off to work with a British charity But I've got connections, and I'll go to Belize with the British Army, who've got a training base there. So the Special Forces on an exercise, and we go out and do some diving training with my instructors before the exercise. We go out on a skiff, we're out diving off the Barrier Reef in Belize. We haven't seen a boat all week, nothing. We've had a lot of fun, and we're coming back one day. I'm driving the boat, and there's a fella in the water. 10 miles out to sea, you see somebody in the water. Now, I've got to say, after 30 years at Scotland Yard, you don't get to be a detective without thinking, there's something not right here. So we picked up this fella, and it's a guy called Clay Wiseman. And he's an American, and he still is an American. And Clay was the captain of a dive boat, a luxury called the Belize Aggressor, which is moored 15 miles away. But for the last 4 or 5 years, he was an underwater photographer, and he'd been taking photographs of all the marine creatures of the Caribbean, and was actually on his way, was in Belize City, going to fly back to Houston to sign this book deal to have this book published. Like a typical guy without his wife there, he's travelling on his own, which we don't do very well. He wakes up at 4 o'clock in the morning in the hotel and realises he's left his passport back on the boat. So he's not going to get on this flight. So he runs down to the dock, and there's a skiff there with 2 likely lads next to it, and the skiff is called Can't Touch That. Can't Touch This, sorry. 2 500 horsepower engines on the back of it, and apparently they run sort of like a mail service between Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize. It's a waterborne FedEx thing. So he says to these guys, here's some dollars, will you take me out to my boat, toot sweet, I've got to get back for a plane. Of course we will, I'll do anything for money, right? That's what they do. So he gives them some money, they set off across the lagoon, which is about 4 or 5 miles, out through a gap in the Barrier Reef, onto the sea, and they're bouncing across the wave tops. And as they're bouncing across the wave tops, they get about 10 miles out to sea, and this boat just opens up on the bottom. The whole hull just splits open. Now, they're sinking. There's 3 guys looking at each other. Can you just draw the thought bubbles above their head at this point? What are they looking at each other and they're thinking, you know the words? They're not Minnesotans. Because I've been in Minnesota now for 3 years. You would not go to International Falls in January without a full tank of gas, without a coat and supply. You have contingency plans, right? You have contingency plans. It's something we're all trained to do. We have a contingency plan. We always have a way to bug out, get out, a backup plan, right? They had no backup plan, no communications, no one knew where they were. They're 10 miles out to sea and they're looking at each other. One of the fellas is called Carlos. One of them is called Munchie. And there's Clay. Now, Clay does this thing, and I know Americans do it because I've seen all the films. He turns around to them and he says, fellas, this is a really bad situation. Okay, we know that. But we can stay here and we can die, or we can swim trying. Stick together, grab a bit of wreckage, stick with me, we'll make it. Keep the sun on our backs, keep heading west, and we'll make land. Okay, real good speech. I know that's what he did. That's what Clay's like. Munchie and Carlos decide we ain't going anywhere. We're going to stay with the wreckage. I mean, there's no rescue service. That was just, actually, it was Munchie's a little bit older, didn't think he could make the swim, and actually just gave up. And Clay was just like, Munchie was like, the other thing, Munchie turned around and said, I'm going to pray. I'm just going to stay here and pray. And Carlos, who's a younger guy, actually I think this is very brave. Carlos stays with Munchie because Munchie won't go. Carlos wanted to go with Clay. I think it's a very brave decision for him to stay, by the way. Clay then sets off and says, well, I appreciate the prayer bit. I'm religious. I'm going to pray as well, but I'm going to give him a chance. And I'm going to swim as much as I can till I fail, and then whatever. We find him, still with a few miles to go, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, you know at 6 o'clock it gets real dark, and I don't think no one would have survived the night. I don't think Clay would have made it ashore. So we pick him up. The first thing is about decision-making. What's the first reaction you want to do? Is, if someone's in trouble, you want to get in that boat and just go out and rescue, right? It's almost a knee-jerk reaction, just go and do something. But because it was actually, I'll put all the credit on the military guys here rather than myself. But we're all making that decision-making process. So let's deal with the bird in the hand. So let's get Clay ashore. Let's find some fishermen. I want to understand the current of the reef. Does it flow north-south, south-north? Is it strong, weak, whatever? And I want an exact bearing to Lighthouse Key, because we've got one shot. We've got 2 hours. We actually burnt a whole hour of that time just to plan, refuel, offload the boat, etc. So we set off at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, it starts to go dark, real quick, and we haven't found anybody. And at that point, just on a wave, about 100 yards off, there they are. Carlos and Munchie. It was just unbelievable. The chances, you've only got to look at a situation of waves at sea. Someone only has to be like 20 yards. Bearing in mind, this is 14 hours later. And we find them. Now, all I ask people is a little bit of, was it the prayer? Was that an element? Was it the sheer, I was going to say bloody mindedness, but probably that's swearing. Was it the sheer determination, sorry, that's a better way of putting it, sheer determination of Clay and his spirit? Was it the organisation, that military, police thinking about best way of doing it? Or was it just a whole bunch of luck? You know, the thing is, I think it was all of that, fold it all in. But I say to people, this is the point, one of the points I want to make, is that we often think everything's dependent on us. The media like to make a hero all about one person. But there isn't anybody in business who's planned any big operation that knows it's not about them. It's about the team, it's about everybody, and it's a whole bunch of things that come together to make things successful. And I think that's the same in your businesses or in your lives. It's actually everybody around you, and it all comes together sometimes, and you end up with a real big bunch of luck. Ta-da! Off to Ukraine. This is where the second bit of cavalry comes in, if I may. So just two stories. So the Olympics are about to happen. The reason I signed up to run the VIP protection operation for the Olympics is I could tell my new wife, that actually October 9th, closing ceremony, I'm done. Okay? But actually, I sneakily had one more operation to do, which was back in Ukraine, which was for one of the anniversary commemoration services for the Crimean War. Now, some of you will say to me, the Crimean War didn't start till last year. There have been others. There aren't many countries, and I'm going to duck behind here if you all start on me, that the Brits haven't fought with. You know, Britain took and defeated the whole of Russia on several occasions. This is one, 1854 to 1856, we took on the Russians and we defeated them, all the way from St. Petersburg down to the Crimea. So this was one war that I'm going to talk about from 1854. And so I wanted to do this because it was personal to me. I'd studied this at school and I wanted to walk the valley of death, okay, which we'll talk about a little bit in a minute. So when I'm doing the reconnaissance visit before the Olympics, it's all going well, but the Yanukovych, who's the president, isn't allowed to be part of the commemoration services because he's persona non grata with the Foreign Office. We won't deal with him because this is all building up to the Freedom Square and the revolution and all the rest of it. He's a pretty unpleasant guy. So I've done the reconnaissance trip. He said he won't come. I'm in Kiev now, about to get on a plane back to the UK. And 3 times in my career, a squad of black cars have turned up, and I've been invited to sit on the back seat and go somewhere. It never feels good. So this usual team of KGB guys turn up, black cars, all smoking, can't speak English, invite me to sit on the back seat of the car, and we're going somewhere. Okay, we're actually going to the presidential palace. And the deal is, the president and all his team want to convince me to take some messages back to the UK that he can be part of this visit. Because what do politicians want? They want to be part of good things, right? So he wanted all the publicity to do with this. So his way of convincing me was to show me the palace. And he's got he's got some very simple messages. One is, if I come, I can show them the palace and they can see all the things that I've got. So you want to show them what I've got. And then he wants to tell me how powerful he is. If I come, we can have all this military and helicopters and we can close roads and we can do all this stuff, which actually would have ruined the visit, by the way. So he's telling me about what he's got and how powerful he is. But what's the key thing about leadership? When you're voting, what are you really trying to work out about somebody? And military people get that. It's service. This guy had no intention of talking about his service or what he was doing for his people or his thing. And actually the one message I wanted to hear from him, not that it would have changed the view, but it was just striking me that he's talking about power and money and not service, which is the only reason, in my opinion, one should seek to lead. So I get away, get into the car at Kiev. So after the Olympics, I go back to do this commemoration service for the Crimean War. Now, I want honesty here. How many people in this room knew about the 1854-1856 Crimean War? So there's a few, okay? The reason I want to make this point is simply about military, because we're always remembering, we always say we shall not forget, okay, about military campaigns. Everybody knew about this campaign back then. It would have even been in America for reasons I'll tell you in a minute. But I also want to tell you, do you know it doesn't matter? Because every generation remembers, and actually history still echoes. Because I'm going to prove to you that every single person in this room knows about this conflict. Okay? And therefore you have a connection with all the soldiers involved in this. Has anybody here heard of Florence Nightingale? Okay? So Florence Nightingale was the nurse that ran the hospital in Scutari that revolutionised, that's easy for me to say, military medicine. In fact, the whole of medicine around the whole of the world was revolutionised by this hygiene and cleanliness. Soldiers in the battlefield would have their leg taken off by a cannon shot, would say to their colleagues, no, I'm fine, I'll fight on. Please don't take me to hospital. Because the survival rate in battle was much higher than the survival rate in the hospital. Florence Nightingale changed that. Does anybody here in the winter in Minnesota wear a cardigan? You know, one of those sweaters with buttons up the front? Okay, that's named after a British officer, Lord Cardigan, who led the charge of the Light Brigade, which I'll talk about in a minute. And he was an eccentric officer. In fact, actually, you have to be eccentric to be a British officer. It's the way it is. But he would think, as a gentleman, he can't lift his sweater over his head and expose his armpits. He didn't like that sort of thing. So he had a valet there in Crimea with him. And then his valet cut the front of his sweaters and put buttons on it. So in a very gentlemanly way, he could do this. And then his valet would take the jumper off the back of his shoulders. And that became that's a really good idea. And that became the cardigan. Has anybody, this is a hijacked term, has anybody heard of the thin blue line? Or the thin red line? Used by fire brigade and police. Okay? Do you know where that came from? The thin red line, and that's where the bagpipes, I was going to show you the bagpipes, the Argyll and Southern Highlanders. The whole British encampment was based around Balaclava, which was a military harbour, where all our assets. You know, if you lose all your logistics, you're done for, right? So the whole army was deployed on a siege of Sevastopol. The Russian army have come round the back, and they're about to take over this camp where all the boats are. Would have been the end of the campaign, the end of the war. One regiment, the 93rd Highland Division, are holding the crest just before. Rather than form a square, which would have been their conventional way of defending from a cavalry attack, there's 3,000 Russian cavalry about to attack their position. The commanding officer decides anywhere we can actually hold the whole valley at this point is to spread out. So he put a single line of soldiers along the thing, and then they fought with such ferocity that the actual Russian charge stopped 100 yards before it because the Russian commander suddenly thought, actually, these guys are so serious, so determined to defend their position, that there must be another bunch of them behind the hill. There wasn't, that was it. But their commanding officer, Colin Campbell, had said, this is where today, gentlemen, you will die. That's the sort of thing people used to say back in there. And they all said, okay, that's what we'll do. We'll stand here. And it was such a determinant cat. So there was one other thing. So William Russell, who thinks embedded journalists came from the Iraq invasion, the first Iraq war? Okay, it didn't. The first ever embedded journalist was a fellow called William Russell that was writing for the Times, which was called The Thunderer, and he was in Crimea and he reported the whole of the Battle of Balaclava, which is the second, and he sees this event and he describes it as a thin red line topped with steel that held back the whole of the Russian army. And that then became the thin red line, which then police and fire brigade and others have used, but actually it was a military engagement back in the 19th century. Charge of the Light Brigade? Who's heard of the Charge of the Light Brigade? Okay, a famous blunder. We all know that sometimes orders are given wrong, and I'm not going into the rights and the wrongs of that. But the Light Cavalry Division were in the valley, this so-called Valley of Death, 600 of them. At the end of the valley was the whole of one detachment of the Russian army, which was over 10,000 soldiers, in a encamped position with cannons on both sides of the valley and at the end of the valley. The commanding officer is on a hill overseeing the whole battlefield, and we know that that's a really important strategic position to be in. However, he can see a mid-sized hill in between his position and the valley where some Russians are taking a British gun emplacement. He sends an order down to Lord Cardigan to retake that cannon. That gets translated, by the time it hits the unit, to take the cannons. The only cannons they can see are the cannons at the end of the valley. Now, I've got a couple of articles or something that was written at the time, but the soldiers were saying in their letters home, we knew it was a folly. We knew someone had made a big mistake. Every single one of the soldiers in that 600 light cavalry detachment knew this was a very, very stupid thing that they were about to do. But they were ordered to do it. And I suspect they weren't thinking about Lord Raglan, who was giving the order at the top of the hill. They were probably doing what soldiers do to this day. They looked left and right. They looked at each other. And they said, if you're going, then I'm going with you. And they charged the Russian position. They actually took the Russian position. The Russians were so scared that this 600 cavalry were coming their way, they actually retreated initially because they thought behind it was going to be more battalions of soldiers and other cavalry. There weren't. So they were totally decimated. And the poem was written called The Charge of the Light Brigade into the Valley of Death rode the 600. Guns to the left of them, guns to the right of them. But was a man dismayed? And it goes on. It's a wonderful poem and still to this day. Balaclava. So there's lots of elements. I could give more examples. I just wanted to say that history resonates, and all campaigns will have their memories. Did anybody see this? This was last year for the 70th commemoration for the First World War, the Great War. This is the Tower of London, central London, and there are 888,863 poppies in the moat. One poppy for every single British fatality in the First World War. Out of a population of under 40 million at the time. Think about that, of ages, men, women, children, and soldiers. And forgetting the wounded, this was the fatalities in the First World War. Just to give you some idea of the scale. This was an amazing thing. Each of these was ceramic, and the view you're seeing is, it looks like a river of blood pouring from one of the gun ports into the valley. The Queen goes to visit. The day before Remembrance Day, 4 terrorists were arrested in London that had knives and machetes. Their intention was to jump over the railing and hack the Queen to death. 4 young men, knives and machetes, a woman in the mid-80s, and this is the following day. They were arrested, by the way, fortunately. It's almost a shame they were arrested at the time. It would have been good to catch them in the act. But nonetheless, the Queen is there that day, and just looking at this picture, I can just remember reflecting on what she was thinking. Do you think she's thinking about herself, or she's totally reflecting on memory and soldiers and her family and people that have served? She's never flinched from anything or anybody, and I've got one more example of that. She also has a lot of fun. As part of doing the filming at Buckingham Palace before the Olympics, where they did that scene with James Bond where he comes and escorts her to the games and she jumps out of a helicopter, and which was a big deal. So this is a picture of the Queen, obviously, really is the Queen, parachuting into the Olympics. 2002, there was another assassination attempt or threat of it for the Queen on her Jubilee. All year she's been going around the country doing commemoration services, and this is the last event, and it's at the Palace, and she used to come out and stand on the dais and take thanks from everybody. For weeks before that, we had intelligence that was credible. Bear in mind it's 2002, so you know what recent events were, that there was going to be an attack on the Queen on this night, and we never actually neutralised the threat. And I'll just say something about intelligence services, etc. You don't always know, because the future is unknown to some extent. We got to the stage where we didn't want the Queen to come to this event, and she turned around and said, there's not a chance I'm not coming. We didn't want her to come. She says, I'm going. Because it's something about leadership that you'll all know, whether it's a a personnel issue, or there's a legal issue, or some challenge you've got in the business, there's one thing as leader you can never do, and she's always got this: you can't duck. And I think sometimes when you get a leadership team, there are events that happen that suddenly you find you're on your own. Now, someone talked about a definition of a leader. A little bit, that's one of mine to some extent, is when things start to go wrong, who's still standing? Yeah, who's left? Well, the Queen turned around. Actually, she did send us a message the morning of the event. She said, if other people could be hurt and it's a really bad deal, I may take to my bed with a cold that afternoon. I thought it was a wonderful solution. That rather than not come and sort of then that be a matter for the press, she was determined she was going to come, but she was so worried about other people, she offered us an option that she might go to her bed with a cold that day. She came. She was going to be out there for 20 minutes. We're standing around the Queen. We've got all the countermeasures in place, but still nervous. It is not cool when the firework displays start and the whole of the protection details jump. So just a little bit. You heard about me sailing across the Atlantic. I sailed single-handed. There's hearts on my spinnakers on my boat. And everyone thinks I'm just an old romantic. It's not, actually. When I was a younger cop, there was a children's hospital on my ground, my patch, call it what you will, where I used to police. And it was for terminally ill children. And I used to go into this hospital and give them my hat and my truncheon. We don't carry guns, by the way. Uniformed cops don't generally carry guns. So you could go in, I'd give them everything that I have. I'd even give them parking tickets. And say, can you write that out to the police chief? The mayor? I'd think of people to give tickets to, and I'd send them to them afterwards. But the symbol for this school was for this hospital was a blue house with smoke coming out the chimney, and the chimney was red hearts. The smoke was red hearts. So I went to Home Depot and bought a bucket of red paint, and I painted it on my sails. I then told the kids I was going to take them on a journey, and I said we're going to sail all the way around Great Britain. So I planned a race. So I could sail all the way around Great Britain and Ireland, which is about 3,000 miles. And I put a tracker on the boat, and I emailed them every day. And I'd say things like, initially I'd say I've done 125 miles, the wind's from the southwest at 4 knots, and I'm doing 6.5 miles an hour. All that sort of really interesting stuff. The kids would send me back a message and say, you're rubbish, you're really slow. I was trying to be nice because they were really ill. And I just soon realised it doesn't matter whether kids are ill or they're not ill. They're kids. They don't know they're going to die. In fact, they don't have to die. They didn't always. But the fact is, the spirit never went away. And I soon realised the thing that I had to do was muller them back. So I'll tell them that you're rubbish, and they say, no, I'm rubbish. And we send them wonderful messages. But the mistake they made is they gave me a teddy bear to take with me. So I got this teddy bear and I put it on a rope and I pulled it up to the top of the mast. And I took a photograph. And I sent that to the hospital. And I said to the kids on an email, if you don't start being nice to me, the bear doesn't come down. But it is important, whatever you do, that you always still engage. And I've just agreed, not quite the right word, but the Lett Children's Hospital in St. Paul, that I'm going to do the next single-handed transatlantic yacht race, which is in 18 months' time, for them. And so I'm going to start getting into that and try and raise some sponsorship and some money for them. But just something about history. When I did the race across the Atlantic, I can tell you it was rubbish. It was cold, it was wet, I was scared, I was hungry. It was awful. But how often do we remember things with rose-tinted spectacles? There's times I think, do you know, that was really good. I really enjoyed that. I'll do it again. And actually now I realise it's a really stupid thing to do, but I'm in the process of gearing up to doing it again for the Gillette in St. Paul. But it is important, as busy as we are, and I run a company, LeClair Group, and it's real busy running a company, but it's so important that you still engage and get involved in communities and do something. So as a way of a finish, and this is a really dull, I could tell you lots of stories, and I know that if we ever meet on a one-to-one basis, I can tell you some more. But just about what LeClair Group does, because we've got some people here. I've brought a team, which I'll introduce you to in a minute, about employee benefits. It is an important thing if you're a business owner, because you're obviously always worried about finance and regulation. And employee benefits is a really important area to get right, because if you don't, you worry about it. And then there's, common goals for employers offering employee benefits. You want to recruit, motivate, and retain your team. but you're worried about regulations, compliance, and penalty avoidance. So it's important to have a broker, whether it's with us or with someone else, to make sure that you understand the risks and to make the best of the options for you. Because there are lots of options today. I don't think whether the Affordable Care Act, I don't think it's made it any easier. I don't think it's ever going to get simple, because it costs a lot of money, but it's an important thing for you to do. Therefore, you need to make sure you get the right advice. And we all know that knowledge is power. And actually, once you've got the knowledge, you're free to get on and do what you do best, which is run your businesses. Just one little example. So we're doing an education program at the moment on Minsure Shop, which is for small businesses under 25 employees. But one little detail in the Affordable Care Act is that during open enrolment from November the 1st until December 15, actually the rules are off. So where you have to have 50%, you have to provide 50% of contribution, and 75% of your employees have to be engaged in the program. For that window of time, they don't have to be. And there's always little exceptions that come along, and there are exceptions for vets as well. There are certain things whereby you don't count people, vets, into your totals to make the 50 or the 100 for the definitions. So there's lots of things that we can help you with to give you the information around your business. LeClair Group, we've been in St. Paul since 1932. It's independent. It's a family-owned business. It's my new wife's family's business, independent, so we're with every company. We're across the whole of the US. We're working with trust vets we have, on behalf of the state, we've been asked to do an education program on employee benefits, and we run 4 seminars a week, and what I've said to Joe, that we will do these to the vets, to your meetings, etc., so that you can come and ask us, and it's all free. You don't pay anything for the advice. I'd like to be your partner. Can I just introduce who's here from LeClair today so that you can perhaps speak to them after this if you get an opportunity. So at the back we've brought in some really good representatives for you. So Darren Delaney, Dave Ison, John Waterbury, you can stand up. Where's John Butler? And who else have we got? Is that all that's left today? Sorry? Oh, and where's Clay? Where's Clay and Jim? Clay Wallace, and where's Jim Kugler? So Jim and Clay are with Trust Vets. They're US Air Force and US Army, and we're working with them to make sure that referrals and leads and that they're all part of the team on it. So please talk to Jim, Clay, Darren, Dave, John, and John afterwards, if you will. Come and at least get our details. If anyone's got any questions, I'll take any questions. I just know that from all my service, the one thing I always have to say is I obviously never promise to tell the truth. So does anybody have any questions before we finish? I know other people know other stories and stuff, but I just thought I'd try and keep it about leadership a little bit today. Sir?
You said you were going to explain what was going on with the British flags, the American flags, and the capital.
Well, the reason for that was that's a picture that people see today in London of the Blues and Royals doing a guard change. And that picture was taken for Obama's visit 2008. And obviously, can you take your flags back? We used to plant our flags all around the world, but now, so you can start taking yours back. The reason I wanted to say, a lot of people see all these images of Britain and, of the ceremony. I just wanted to take you back in my career 30 years before that. That was exactly the same detachment that was blown up. Ceremonial, doing good, on their way to the palace, and, I'm not getting into the politics of it, but if you're a soldier and you're on a ceremonial duty and you can't see the enemy and someone just sets off a bomb behind your backs, it's not good then and it's not good now. So that was why I wanted you to picture that picture, because that was the horses that you saw 30 years before. I was just trying to draw that link. So my very first day was with the Blues and Royals, and my very last day was actually walked. So it was a royal visit, and I got to walk the whole of the Valley of Death. And it was just incredibly poignant to walk a battlefield, as we all know. And then I got on a plane after that visit and came to America. So that was the connection. Anything else? Sir?
What's the most endearing quality of the royal family?
Endearing? Oh, I don't know if they're endearing. I don't know, just that. I mean, look at what was the thing about the Royal Marines. Was it the 14 attributes? And certainly I could apply most of that to the Queen and most of the members of the family. After 63 years and 7 months, you've got to say endurance counts. She has, for me, I'll give you one anecdote. I was in Russia to do with it was a recently opened petrochemical, the largest oil distribution place, I think, in the world. More oil flows around this port just outside of St. Petersburg, and it had been opened by Putin. Now, I was there to visit this place with Prince Michael of Kent. I'm going to say this was back in 2009, maybe 2008. And we were going to go and see it. But all of the people at that refinery wanted us to, he said, well, will you open it? Now, bearing in mind, Putin had opened this thing and the owners had opened it. I said, why do you want a member of the British royal family to open it? Now, Prince Michael's related to the Tsars. He actually looks like Tsar Nicholas. And I said, well, I'll ask. And he says, well, if they want me to, I'll open it. I saw the pictures of when Putin opened it. And it was, a band playing, wasn't much. And you can imagine everyone was standing around looking pretty desultory and bored with the whole occasion. When I come back with Prince Michael of Kent, every single person that had been part of the building of that place, everyone that worked at that place, all of the families, the distributors, the supply chain, the ships were all made out in flags, and there were bands and bunting and food and parties. Because the difference between, and I'm not drawing the distinction between your president, please don't take this the wrong way, but the distinction between a president and a monarch or a member of the royal family is that having somebody that is totally, let's say, disinterested in the event, saying well done, means so much more. So when Putin came and the owners came, they all saw, well, we know what's in it for you. You're the president and you're getting a bit of that, and the owners are getting money. And why would we be thankful for you coming and saying well done? So when Prince Michael came, it was genuinely, without anything in it, without votes or money, it was someone saying, do you know what? This is fantastic. You've done a great job. And that's what royalty does. It's someone to put their arms around the nation, say, well done, you've done a great job, without any reward. And so I suppose that, for me, is the most enduring thing, that almost everything that happens, however busy they are, they'll always be there. They're always there. And the Queen's never taken, I think she's had, in a whole service, I think she's only ever failed to appear for 3 engagements. And 2 of them when she was having a baby. Anyway, so I'm Richard Lett. I now live in Minnesota, which is fantastic, by the way. I really enjoy it. I live in Minneapolis. Our offices are in Woodbury. I have a reverse commute. I'm starting to get used to the weather, and I'm starting to get to understand what you eat and drink, and I'm learning to fish. It's a wonderful place. I've got some wonderful people that work with us, and we would really love to make sure that you're in the right place, whatever your businesses are, on employee benefits. As dull as that might sound. I used to be in insurance policy, and I guess now I'm trying to sell them. Well, thank you for your time today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.